Trump always says he's a great businessman, and he's running this war exactly like he ran his businesses, in the red. According to two congressional sources, the war with Iran is coming with a minimum price tag of roughly $1 billion a day, and it's climbing higher. On Friday, the president held an emergency meeting with the nation's top weapons manufacturers, with the White House claiming there is a deal to quadruple weapons production. The problem, we're using missiles faster than we can make them. America is launching multi-million-dollar interceptors to stop Iran's roughly $35,000 drones. These interceptors are incredibly effective, but they're also incredibly difficult to make. One analyst compared it to shooting down an e-bike with a Ferrari. But the U.S. routinely needs to launch multiple interceptors to shoot down one drone. So actually, it's like shooting down an e-bike with a bunch of Ferraris at the same time. Now we're copying Iran's playbook and using cheap drones instead of high-cost missiles. Meet Lucas, or low-cost unmanned combat attack system, the new solution for a cheaper defense system. Funny enough, war appears to be the one place where Trump is actually trying to deliver on affordability. Speaking of affordability, this war with Iran is now 9 days in. And at this rate, instead of adding to the deficit by killing people, we could have funded WIC for an entire year, the program that feeds nearly 7 million mothers and newborns. 2 days into this war, had already cost more than all the supposed DOGE savings. And if this war extends to 35 days, the cost would be enough to fund the ACA healthcare subsidies for a year. You know, the ones that Trump let expire. The war that President Trump has called a war that we can't afford to lose is quickly becoming a war we can't afford. Joining us now is Major General Randy Manner, former acting vice chief of the National Guard Bureau. So, Major General, you oversaw the U.S. withdrawal from Iraq in 2010. And based on what we're seeing now with this war, no exit strategy, at least $1 billion a day in burn rate, and all these ongoing strikes with no end state that we're trying to reach, is Iran's strategy just to keep raising the cost of war by terrorizing our regional allies?
My thoughts are first, of course, with all of the fallen soldiers and their families, as well as, of course, the military and their families, the military that are serving in the Middle East, as well as their families that are very concerned with them. And, of course, the tens of thousands of American civilians who are still stuck there, as I was, abandoned by the U.S. government. So, by the way, the burn rate is far in excess of $1 billion a day. I will tell you that unequivocally, as the Deputy Commanding General of U.S. Army Forces in the Middle East at the time. This is that $1 billion, that's conservative. That's extremely conservative. It also infuriates me that the administration does not have a strategy as far as why are we doing this. I am all on board about the fact that the Iranians should not have the ability to produce nuclear weapons. However, the negotiations were ongoing, let alone the fact that he threw out the pre-existing agreement with Iran because he didn't have his name on it. So the bottom line up front is that we cannot sustain this long term. Every missile we fire here is one less that we have to protect the United States and one less that we have to be able to protect other important interests around the world, whether it is Europe or whether, of course, it's Taiwan. So again, every weapon we fire, one less to protect the homeland.
General, I wanted to ask you about exactly that, about the costs to our national security. Basically, what are the opportunity costs here? As well, what do you think our adversaries or frenemies, for that matter, around the world are making of all of this? I imagine China, for example, may be counting down how many munitions we are reportedly expending. And Russia, for that matter, may also be paying attention. Like, what are the vulnerabilities that are created as a result of this war of choice and using a lot of our military capacity and our actual artillery in this war?
the president is 100% wrong when he says we have unlimited resources. We do not. Whether it is the munitions or whether it is the young daughters and sons that are in our military, these are very, very scarce and valuable resources. And here he is using them for a reason that I do not understand. And remember, I served 36 years in the military. And so it's for me to be confused about it, about why we are doing this, rather than negotiating, is just, it's bizarre. It almost seems like they Googled all the reasons to attack Iran and then threw them all into the press conferences. It's disjointed. The fact that the State Department was not clear about getting civilians out in advance, and the fact that all of our allies were caught off guard is just amazing. Again, I felt absolutely abandoned in the Middle East with literally Germans, French, Czech, Spaniards, and so on, receiving notifications from their embassies and from their ministers of their ministries saying where to go, how to get out, and that they were going to take care of them. Whereas literally, no joke, our government website says we cannot help you and you need to find your own way out. That is an embarrassment to every citizen of the United States and to all the families that are here wondering about their loved ones in the Middle East.
General, let me get your thoughts on allies here, because you brought up some of our European allies. And there's an irony that's playing out in this war, which is one country that has actually had some success shooting down these Iranian drones on the cheap is Ukraine, because Iran was supplying them to Russia, and Ukraine has been dealing with how to shoot down these Iranian drones for some time now. But given the fact that our president has spent the better part of the last year in the campaign year before that attacking the president of Ukraine, diminishing him, insulting our European allies as well. I just want to get your thoughts on that from a military perspective. When you've alienated and isolated and demeaned and insulted an ally that could come and help you right now, and you've denied them weapons that they need in their fight, how do you as a military planner process that? How do you think about that? Your commander-in-chief is not doing the best that he can in terms of what he can provide for your soldiers.
It's an embarrassment that we literally are using missiles that cost many millions of dollars to defeat small drones that cost tens of thousands of dollars. The Ukrainians have done an incredible job of being able to, quite frankly, counter the threats that they have. Yes, with NATO assistance and with our assistance, but they are doing it in a very inexpensive manner. They have developed techniques to be able to engage drones from the Russians highly effectively, and also, by the way, to strike deep inside of Russia using very inexpensive drones. There are so many lessons that we can actually learn from the Ukrainians instead of thinking that we are the smartest people in the world. We are not. There are people that are way ahead of us about how to engage in this way. Yes, of course, we have a very strong military, absolutely, positively, the most powerful one on the earth. However, we are not limited. We are not limitless. We do have constraints of production. And of course, every time we deploy our ships, our aircraft, and our personnel, that means that they have to rotate out to be able to recover and recuperate.
General, to your point, that while the U.S. military is incredibly strong, we, as any military does, have vulnerabilities. I wonder if this were to become a much more drawn-out, protracted conflict, if it is too much to wonder if there is a risk here of an almost Vietnam-like situation. You know, Iran, to my understanding, has incredibly complex, deep mountains. They have been preparing for a conflict of this nature for a lot longer in a sort of deeply existential and, of course, in some cases in the regime, sort of religiously fanatic manner. And I wonder how those two things, combined with their, you know, geographic advantages as well as the topography, could very much complicate things for the U.S. military if we were to actually send men and women there on the ground and expect them to take the fight into a next phase.
So it's extremely naive and, quite frankly, a reflection of incompetence to think that we can do a regime change. Think about it in reverse. If all of a sudden our administration was wiped out in some manner, would we all of a sudden be defenseless or whatever? Of course not. We would have people who would fill in and be able to continue to operate the government. In that same way, the Iranians are the same way. Even though there's so many of their senior leaders have been killed, there are more standing in the wings. A ground war in Iran would be extremely difficult. I actually helped get out 100,000 Americans over a 6-month period from Iraq. We would need 2 or 3 times that many, if not more. And remember that every day that this goes on, we are losing the support of our allies and the use of the bases in the Middle East, from which we rely on heavily to be able to quite frankly, influence Iran and others to be able to, in terms of our national security interests. So this is very disconcerting, and I think that the administration lacks the experience and the sophistication. Plus, of course, he's surrounded by yes men, rather than trying to say what are the risks to the United States and to our military by a prolonged engagement.